really nice out. Like really, really nice out. This is the kind of November I can get used to. Well, that was random. Exceptional radio. So I was just randomly perusing Facebook Marketplace, and a louver appeared, like vents for the side of a saloon door, or for a cabinet, or for a fan. Well, almost all of the louvers within 60 miles of us are for Mustangs. Mustang louvers, side window louvers. And the people who have these things aren't asking much. They're asking like $15 to maybe $60 for a really fancy looking one. But even then, you can find the exact same one for like $20 less. Here's somebody who wants $100. They're not going to get that money. But it's pretty impressive. Like, just searching for louvers, I've got like pages. Oh, here's that really fancy one, $11. So, and they're like, when I say they're all Mustangs, I maybe 5 out of the 100 I've looked at thus far are not Mustangs. And oh, here we go. Here are a handful that are like door louvers and panels for like, a house or a kitchen or the side of a garage. And we're back into automotive louvers, and they're all for Mustangs. Like, people go out and buy these things thinking like, yeah, this thing's gonna be awesome. I'm gonna make it look like a Boss 302 or something. And then they get it on there and they realize they can't see shit out the back of their window.
Yeah, I always wondered about that. Because I'm like, man, I guess it looks cool, but I don't know if I'd be able to see out of that shit. And yeah, it doesn't seem, some of them, they can't see out of them because there's like only 3 small slits. But
I'm gonna
I
say,
always wondered if it was like the Kanye glasses.
Yeah, it only looks cool on a mid-engine supercar. It doesn't look good on a Mustang or a Camaro or a Nissan. It only looks cool on mid-engine cars that look like they cost more than most people's homes. When it looks like a spaceship, that's when it looks cool. Normal cars don't look cool with this shit. These are like mistake parts. That's why there's so many of them.
So I think they're like Genesis.
The Hyundai spinoff.
Hyundai Genesis, yeah. One of those had a louver, and it was like a gray and red colorway.
Mm.
And with the louver, it looked really cool, which is where I'm like, for a Hyundai, like,
so
you do the right things to it, and it ends up looking like a Aston Martin or some shit.
And like 13 years ago, when they released the Hyundai Genesis GT Coupe. It had like a V6 and a really pretty interior. Really nice. It looked really nice. It looked like an actual sports car, not just some coupe with a lot of accents. And I've seriously considered purchasing one. And then I like started like doing math, and it's like, man, this is gonna be like $800 a month before I start paying for things like gas or insurance. And
car payments are ridiculous, man. It's like, this shit is wild to know. There was like a TikTok going around.
I mean, this was 13 years ago, and it was only a $38,000 car, but because they were
That's
so
low now.
I know, but they were so rare in America. There were only like 10,000 of them of that specific model, of that specific configuration. And
what I'm saying is, some of the car payments now are like $2,000 to $3,000 a month for some shit where you're like, what are they driving? A fucking Ferrari? And they're like, no, it's like a 2023 Chevy Tahoe or some shit. And you're like, what the fuck? $2,000 a month? So $800 a month? It's not that bad.
No, I get that now. But what's crazy now is that when I look, oh, so for years, like Mazda has been like the hey, we're also here and we can do it for less brand of Japanese cars. And one of my favorite YouTube personalities was talking about how Mazda just changed everything, and it was like it was like kind of changing the way that people were looking at compact cars. You know, we're talking about like a Mazda 3, a Toyota Corolla, a Honda Civic, a Hyundai Elantra, Kia. I think they call it a K5 now. Um, and other than that, like this is a market that's entirely the Asian auto market. There are a few German cars like a Golf or a Jetta can kind of compete in that market, but not really because they cost too much, which is really weird. But Mazda is now sitting at the verge of actually they probably are a premium brand now because what they give people for their base model car was like better than every other competitor's base model car. And even though they cost more just for like the basic version of their car, it was still, once you start optioning out all these other compacts to be competitive with this Mazda, all of a sudden they cost, $2,000, $3,000 more. Like a Kia costing more than a Mazda, and it has, just to get to the same level of options and engine and all that kind of stuff. And
Well, I think a lot of this has to do with the market though, because the Golf and Jetta specifically didn't used to cost that much
nope.
until like suburban people started buying every single one of them and they were on a fucking wait list, and then they started jacking up the prices, and then they started being like
Well,
hyper expensive for what they are. So
I think what happened is that there are very few small cars left. The market, at least in America, seems to be everything.
that's
Everywhere I
true.
look, it
Very
seems to be
few.
like big SUV, big truck, bigger SUV, bigger truck, more power, more modern engine, more complicated engine, more technology, technology. I fail to. I guess I'm just not with it because I can't grasp like who's driving their giant technology truck as a commuter.
Well, the issue becomes, I've watched it happen, and what they do is anybody who buys one of those big cars uses the fact that everybody else is driving a big car, so they need a big car so they're not overpowered on the road by those other people. And it's like some weird chicken and egg thing
What a
where they
crazy
use
positive feedback loop.
exactly, and then
Oh,
every ultimately everybody's driving fucking big cars because that's the sentiment. And then I think a lot of it has to do with
like fully optioned big cars
semis.
too, not just like big, but like loaded.
Yeah,
Like
for sure.
when
And
when I went to the Ford website to look at their big trucks, um, when I tried to price the cheapest, most basic Ranger or F-150, like the XL, it says due to like supply shortages, some of these
oh yeah, there's a
aren't
list.
available. Like you got to wait,
Yeah,
you got to get in line to get the most
maybe
basic
sometimes
version.
3 years, bro, for
But
these trucks.
almost immediately in like the same browser session, you can buy like the fully loaded Lariat, Platinum, King Ranch, whichever one tickles your fancy. You can find that one ready to go in whatever color you want, with or without the options, because they're installing that at the dealership. But it's crazy. You can't find entry level vehicles online even, and like Ford and GM even said that they were going to start moving towards a direct model where you can purchase directly from them. How's
Well,
that?
the delay between the dealerships and the distributors is causing the distributors or the dealerships are getting stuck with a lot of backstock because they can't move them fast enough,
Yeah,
and in the process they have in some cases clauses where they can sell them back to the company. So it's like it doesn't actually benefit Ford or GM or whoever for these dealerships to sit on a bunch of stock because they're not necessarily going to turn a profit if that happens.
Yeah, I
So it's
imagine
like,
it's just like a O'Reilly's or Advance where one of their stores within a 5 hour radius of any store has that part, and they'll just have somebody drive it there. And so if somebody wants that truck, they'll just move it through the dealer network, and then
yes, that's true, which is also why individual dealers are sitting on less stock and they're not buying as many cars and they've cut. Like I've been watching like there's a few YouTube, I'm sure there's a bunch, but there's a few YouTube channels with car dealers that talk about the trends in the market. And this
like
one guy
Kia's
goes,
being unable to stay on the lot at all, like they
I mean,
fly
all
off
of that
lots.
stuff. There's a whole
Yeah,
bunch, they go into all in the individual market nuances, whether it's like specific Kias being hard to hold on to, or F-150s being hard to hold on to. Like they can't hold on to those at all because everybody wants fucking F-150s and
yeah,
Rangers. So like you're saying, there's like specific models that they'll talk about where they're we can't even, it's like there's like a I think it might be a Jetta station wagon that nobody can hold on to. There's a bunch of these things, but ultimately they've had to cut their inventory in half because it's a buyer's market and not a seller's market. And what he was also, one of the guys was also saying is like, if the market is lowering prices on new cars, then the dealers that actually move their cars have to lower the prices on the old cars. So it's like if you want the older inventory to compete with the new cars, you have to drop it. So it's like
yeah,
hitting on all fronts. So it's like even though the cars are expensive, it's not actually at margins that are benefiting the dealerships, and they're not moving fast enough to keep up with the output. So you're getting these inventory backups, the lists are backed up, but the cars aren't getting out on the road because there's a choke point at
yeah.
the dealerships. So this is where you're seeing
And dealerships will
companies
approve
starting
people
to
for
sell
credit lines
directly
like
more.
with like just a
Oh yeah,
signature
that
and a
too.
smile.
Oh my God, that's part of it too. And then they're getting repoed. So there's like a whole bunch of repo cars that then end up getting sold aftermarket for way less than they should at these auctions because they were repoed instead of going to somebody who wasn't going to default on their loan. So there's all these aspects of the market that's contributing to um, producers wanting to sell directly to the customer,
Yeah,
but America's going to have to then deal with like auto dealerships dying, which isn't really a bad thing because it's usually only like one or two people that's really making a ton of money off of it. And everybody that works there is like, they're doing fine, but they're not making bank like the boss. So, like,
I
I don't
think
really see a problem with auto dealerships going out.
I think what we'll see as the dealership model declines in favor of a direct from the manufacturer model is the service center is about the only thing that can survive, like a licensed or certified service center. Like Toyota does that kind of stuff, Mazda does that kind of stuff, Honda I think has a certified um, like maintenance program where you can take your vehicle to a specific location in your area type thing. I think that's where the dealership model ends up, and they might be
Subaru's like that as
like
well.
like a delivery model where like yeah you can pick up your freshly ordered vehicle here. We don't keep anything in stock. We're just like a licensed delivery receipt facility or something like that. Because on some level there is a deep relationship that those kind of places have with the manufacturer, and they do maintain a lot of vehicles. It's we like to make fun of the dealership because they always try to stiff people, and they do, but they also maintain a lot of vehicles under warranty, like, and just do regular maintenance because some people are responsible with their vehicles. Not everything is a customer states video or a like mechanic nightmare video. I mean,
Well, it's
those are
like,
probably the
okay,
outliers, but
you know, I've been driving a lot lately and I was thinking about mechanical breakdown and failure. And that's where I'm like, the way these vehicles are built that just there just really shouldn't be that much breakdown or failure
There really shouldn't.
if you maintain it. And that's all is like um there's not any extra movement or overlap on the parts to cause grinding and like filing. So like if you just maintain your fluids and make sure that everything is like balanced as much as possible, it's like theoretically a lot of these vehicles should drive a million miles and then not have really any problems. But I think
I think it's reasonable to expect a vehicle to last
realistically,
200,000 miles and last for 20 years. If its fluids are changed regularly, it's never driven too hard, it's never gets too hot, that kind of stuff.
and the issue is
But seals
the
eventually get old.
but this is where the winters and the salt is like the big problem
Oh
because
yeah.
like when you're dealing with especially the artificial salting,
Oh man, dude,
um
vehicles in
like
Texas don't have rust on them.
yeah, shit like that. So it's especially, but if you go what is it like East Coast,
Shit, if you just drive into like,
um
yeah, an
where
hour
they have
north
like
into,
salt water, it's like um you know the shit it's in the air and it'll fucking
oh
rust
yeah,
your shit from just even if there's no snow on the ground, the actual salt water in the air is like
that was
enough.
that was one of the things that was mentioned when I was in Galveston last year was like there's so much salt in the air, we're gonna have to spray the vehicles down when we get home because everything just got a salt air bath. You could like feel it on your face too, like just this like thin vapor deposited grit.
Yeah, you can definitely feel it if you're like actually near the water.
Yeah, the ocean is crazy. Like just getting into salt water and then getting out, like the film that or the layer of stuff that emerges after the water is done. That's the strangest version of water that I've experienced is seawater. There's so many things that
Have
we
you ever
call
done a float tank?
yeah.
Well, and
Actually,
that's where you know you don't really notice it when you're getting in the ocean, but if you have any sort of open anything on your body, like the float tank just stings that shit.
yeah.
Oh my god, it's insane. That's one of
That's
the
like super. That's like a hyper salinity solution, though, right?
yeah, it's like 800 pounds of salt.
Yeah, that's the stuff where if you don't rinse off immediately, it starts forming crust on your skin.
Oh yeah, for sure, definitely.
Yeah, I could only listen to my heartbeat and my gut burble for so long before I just had to get out. It was really neat though, but also really strange. It's we call a lot of things water, but I bet the chemical formula for seawater is very fucked up. Like compared to what comes out of the tap that people can drink in North America. The potable water that comes out of the tap, sorry, because there is definitely some water that comes out of the tap that contains like petroleum products or byproducts, extraction byproducts.
Well, it's there's something with the property of water. I forget what the name of it is, but it's uh
Oof.
the connections but the bonds between molecules is easily attached and detached, which is why droplets of water can like come together and come apart really easily. Um I forget it's like yeah, they're coalescent bonds. So it's like
Oh yeah, so seawater is
because
like
it's
H2O5, and by five there's like parentheses around H2O. So it's
Right,
like
exactly.
five water
Exactly. So
molecules bonded to
for
each
every
other.
one ACL.
Yeah.
And that's why it's like it's possible to pull
But
them apart and desalinate, but it takes energy
yeah, it also
because of the
contains
bond being
boron,
stronger than
bromide, fluoride, inorganic carbon. What the fuck? Strontium. Oh man. Yeah. So we call a lot of things water apparently. I know that the water that's used in
well,
the
and this is also a difference between heavy oxygen in terms of O3 versus O2 or ozone. Um, so like when three oxygen molecules form together and the the isotope has a different um, bonding mechanism, and also the types of bonds are different or can be different. So that's why like
yeah, like the water in the
ozone's dangerous to humans because of the way it like attaches to other things in our body.
well, it rapidly oxidizes everything because it has a weak bond with that extra oxygen.
Exactly.
It's like the super Kamiokande Neutrino Observatory in Japan. There's like two giant chambers of pure H2O, and it's so dangerous. It like or caustic. It dissolves stainless steel tools if they end up like submerged for any period of time. People go who use it. They go through like gallons of conditioner to keep their hair so it doesn't just go brittle and flake off. They wear specialized rubber suits to go in and service the chamber because that water is like, super dangerous water because it's like neutral water that it can actually exist. I guess it does because that's what they use to capture neutrino images or fields. Like the most incredible camera ever. It's two like giant buildings that are underground full of these big ass tubes. By tubes, they're more like bulbs, but they can detect neutrinos and do like essentially passive scans as the Earth kind of rotates around and through the Milky Way.
It's pretty wild. This it was well, I guess that's how you get around neutrinos not actually being an interact with the physical matter or
Yeah. Apparently, neutrinos make icebergs glow. Like ice reacts to neutrinos. Water reacts to neutrinos. That's why they fill it with water. Of course, Japan has a neutrino camera.
yeah, it just seems like there's so many properties of water that we haven't truly discovered yet in terms of it like improves conductivity and accelerates sound and shit like that where
Yeah.
it's like you know
By the
what is it
way,
about water.
by the way, sound travels 4 times faster in water than in air at sea level.
Yeah, that's so crazy.
At sea level, it's important to mention that part though, because it changes at different altitudes and pressures.
Which is also crazy.
And I'm pretty sure water's natural state is ice.
I mean, I guess in the grand scheme of the universe, yeah.
That's what I'm thinking. Like in the grand scheme of like all the water in all of the universe, I bet most of it exists as ice floating around. Like
Probably. I mean, I feel like that wouldn't even really be debatable. I feel like that's like somebody probably has done a study to prove that shit where you're like I mean, not to say that you know that that happened, but I feel like that specific type of information where you're like,
Yeah, that's the kind of
all
thing
this
that
floating water in the vacuum of space is gonna be formed as ice,
it
like
should be an
most
obvious thing.
comets.
Yeah,
Yeah,
should be complete. This is like obvious. There should be more water floating around as ice, which means that like our liquid
because
water environment is actually very rare, much more rare than we believe it to be.
well, because supposedly that's one of the main um theories for what originated the water on our planet in the first
Yeah.
place. So it's like, yeah, just because it's not in the form of ice now doesn't mean that's not how it originated. So
Have you read about the confirmation of the chunks of stuff floating around in the upper mantle or below in the in the upper mantle, like the magma layer that aren't of this Earth?
no.
So scientists now believe that these chunks are the remnants of Theia, the planet that collided with the early Earth, the Gaia planet structure, and helped to dislodge enough material from the Pacific, what would become the Pacific Ocean, to become the moon.
It's funny. There's like a Rakim verse where he talks about where the moon split off from the earth, and I was like, that's funny uh that he of all people would drop that in a rhyme where nothing, not to say that I would think that he wasn't smart at all, but like when
No,
you
that takes some
have
creativity.
rappers for sure, but it's like that notion of that theoretical framing of how the moon was formed to like have that in a rap is like pretty, that not many people are gonna do that.
Well, I
And
think
that's
maybe
I
like
feel like
10 years
sorry, go
ago, it was demonstrated through lead, plutonium, zircon dating, which is like accurate to billions and billions of years. Um, that the moon, that zircons found on the moon are the same age as zircons found on the Pacific seafloor and around the Ring of Fire. And so we know that they're the same material and they're the same age. And it's just a matter of, well, how did they get there? And so finding all of this material and using like planetary sonar and geomagnetic resonance, like running an MRI against the entire planet, basically. They've determined that there are these objects that are just floating around, and they are part of what creates. It's part of the dynamo of the Earth. It's what helps to create the our Van Allen belt, our magnetosphere, because we've got two distinctly different materials, metals, um, circling each other and creating a giant like field, electromagnetic field. I think that's super rad, but it also contributes to like the stability of the Earth's axis because this thing's floating around on its own inside of a swirling vortex of liquid rock and metal. Kind of an unfathomably complex reaction, actually. Now that I begin to think about it, I just the bigger it becomes in my mind, the less detail I can actually compose for it.
yeah, that's the same conclusion I came to. It's like you can imagine planets colliding, but that's all you're doing. That's all you're doing
I've seen
is
I've seen marbles shot at each other. I know what that looks like.
right. Yeah. Our brains just have no idea. Like, even if we looked at a simulation of what it was like that was 100% accurate, our brain wouldn't be able to like extrapolate backwards what that actually entailed.
Oh
None of our
man,
faults. No, none of our faults. It's just
yeah.
no person has that capacity, and that's where.
Well, even the models, they all show two planetary form, not quite fully formed planetary bodies colliding. Like they're still
Mhm.
hot and boiling with liquid rock and debris and stuff colliding with them. And so this thing hits the Earth and blows up, and portions of it become embedded in the earth, all over the place. Like probably where the earth gets all of its really cool minerals and resources that we normally associate with like stuff out in the Oort cloud or beyond Mars, because there really isn't, there doesn't seem to be a lot of useful stuff the further we go into the solar system, without excessive risk. Like the materials that are available on Mercury are almost inaccessible, and any resources that are available on Venus are completely, inaccessible. The Moon and Mars don't have their own magnetosphere. Jupiter produces enough radiation on its own that even with its magnetosphere, it's probably going to kill people that try to extract resources from its moons.
Well, and I guess I'm just not of the mind that humanoid life formation is the most efficient or effective in the universe. So like there's I mean, obviously not everything on planet Earth is even humanoid, but like I'm I'm not convinced that there's no way that there can be rock-like life structures that aren't necessarily animated or mobile in their
Maybe
um
we don't appreciate their time
visible
scale.
capacity. Right, exactly. So their time scale is just going to be so vastly different that it's like our lifespan wouldn't allow us to comprehend what their lives are even like. So that's where I'm like, when we're looking at universal life possibilities, I'm still not like leaning towards humanoid as the most
I'm all in favor of sending machines.
I mean, that's fine, but I'm saying like even in terms of like machines becoming life is a whole thing of getting there if it's not the Transformers as far as we know, where their their history is like Cybertron beget them as like a living planet or Unicron or whatever the fuck it
Well,
was at first, where I'm
Cybertron
like,
and Unicron are siblings.
right, but I'm
So
saying like whichever one beget them, it was like the planet bore them,
yeah,
and it bore the like alpha beings or whichever, and those alpha beings bore the Autobots, and then the other ones bore the Decepticons. So there's like a trail that you can trace where it wasn't like humans were born or whatever created, and then they made the Transformers. Like no, the planet made the Transformers creators. So like in that context, the story gives them an origin that doesn't necessitate other types of evolution to happen before. So that's where I'm like, not to say that that happens in other planets, but like our evolutionary trajectory that ends up with a humanoid um,
I'm kind of voting for cephalopod.
predator. I mean, yeah, like that. That's what's dominating the ocean, which is most of the planet. So, like in reality, we're just the land dominators. The cephalopods, like, kind of have this planet on lockdown. So, like, yeah, I'm not. I wouldn't doubt that the cephalopod had a more likelihood of being the deferring structure for life than a humanoid is what I'm getting at. Like I just don't, it's very narcissistic of our species to think that like we're going to encounter other intelligent humanoid life forms before we encounter other intelligent types of life forms that aren't humanoid from my perspective. But like all our fiction tends to point towards humanoid extraterrestrials. Oh, and when I say humanoid, I mean biped, uh, bilateral symmetry, with like brains that are in skull structures and in no exoskeleton type shit. So it's like you could describe if that's like humanoid, a lot of things could fit that description as humanoid on Earth, but then that would just be um mammal, like mammalian. So it's like I don't mean
So speaking of
every
bilateral symmetry, recently I learned about the starfish and pentaradial symmetry because a starfish apparently is just a big head.
yeah, and it's regenerative
Yeah,
as fuck.
it has like it's
So
one of those creatures like a octopus that has like extra brains that are dedicated to like specific processes.
so that's the type of shit where I'm like, theoretically, do you need to build a hospital if you can just regenerate your limbs?
No.
You know? So of course not. Like it sounds stupid, but when some things have their existence so streamlined, like humans like to reduce them into primitive, but in some ways it's like clearly the starfish has had more time to evolve than we have in its own form, whereas we are the result of evolution evolutionary steps. Um, but it's had its own evolutionary line within its form to get it to this point where it's like it don't need 99% of the shit that we as humans need to survive. So like is that starfish less civilized than us? Technically, yes, but it doesn't need our type of civilization to exist, which is also why when humans start to like separate themselves out from the race as like individuals who are above it, that's when it's also delusional in terms of like obviously we're not the type of animal that can be born and survive immediately in the same way that other animals can, but it's easy to forget that the older we become and have more autonomy. But even in that autonomy, like our especially Western civilization tries to like teach us that as an individual we somehow have more importance than the unit, when in reality we can't exist without the unit. So it's like this weird delusion of which also when one who's raised in Western culture learns that the Eastern cultures don't all have that same tinge unless they have heavy Western influence. It's like interesting to see that um, all human life on Earth doesn't get born with that same individualist predisposition. And further, the predisposition to be altruistic for the greater good has more historical precedent the more you learn about humans. So it's like, on the one hand, obviously the Chinese government is not um, completely altruistic and is not acting in the name of humanity, but it was never the Chinese government that carried that uh, dogma, and it was almost always the like culture and the people that carried that altruistic dogma, which is why you then get the Cultural Revolution, because when the government's trying to crack down on that dogma and get rid of that, it's the people who fight back against it. So there's a lot of things about Chinese altruism as a historical concept that deserves its own like asterisk in the context of altruism, um, especially because it has a much longer history than Western altruism, and it has a more historical line of integrity than Western altruism, and that's where I'm like, that's not even that's just facts. That's just history at that point. But the problem is Westerners are not taught that history, and they're framed with the post Soviet reformist framing of communist China as being a government that only exists since like 1980 and represents all of Chinese history in the Western view. And that's like, they've done that with Russia, they've done that with Iran, they've done that with China, they've done that with Iraq, they've done that with Saudi Arabia, they've done that with all these countries. China is not the only one to have the US government go in and homogenize its entire history into the local 30 years of active government, because it's even happening now in like Israel. So there's all these places in which United States propaganda will go in and like rewrite the history and then deliver that history, or deliver that rewritten history as a package of propaganda to people about that place before that place has a chance to introduce itself. But because of internet access and other cultural crossover points, I think especially Bruce Lee specifically is one of those crossover points. And I know he was trying to do that. Like, he was actively trying to do that and he succeeded, which is why I think people still hold him to that regard. But there's this element of like, the reason I'm on this is the mysticism that people associated with martial arts, and like by proxy through martial arts to Chinese and Japanese culture mostly, and in the process had like this 15 to 20-year period of like hyper mysticization of martial arts and Asian martial arts specifically. Um, it wasn't good for Chinese or Japanese people for that thing to happen. And when it was in the process, I think the Chinese people that worked to overcome it inadvertently gave Westerners a formula to like steal their culture and mimic it and create this mock version of Chinese film martial arts that was inspired by Chinese opera, and in the process completely misunderstand the important things about those martial arts and about the context of those martial arts within the Chinese opera. So it's like, it's Westerners aren't the only people to do this, but when they started making martial arts movies in the 80s, well, late 70s, early 80s, and into the 90s, all the way into the 90s, you see this like
American Ninja one.
Yes, exactly.
American Ninja
especially
2.
the ninja stuff.
Ugh.
There's this mysticism about the movements where you have even like the Count Dantes in real life who think that, I don't know if he really thought there was a death touch, but they're willing to put up the facade that they believe that there's a death touch to take on students, to try to sell them this notion of this mystic art that then gets represented through all these movies about ninjas and all this shit, where then by the early 90s it's mockery, like got surf ninjas, three ninjas, ninja turtles, to the point where enough people are aware that the mysticism is not true that now
Ninja
there's a joke
barbershop
element to it. Right, shit like that. But then the kids are still subject to being tricked by the mysticism, so it persists for another 5 years or so. But the ultimate thing being like, I think the final end point for Chinese mysticism in martial arts is Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Not because of any fault of the film, but I think once Hong Kong reclaimed choreography in film, that's when people started to realize that like all the stuff that they had seen in American cinema was like a terrible version of what could be. And then the Chow Yun Fats and Donnie Yen started coming back in vogue because they were actually good at that shit. So you get this like period of like um Michael Dudakovs and like random white dude ninjas that are like all the ninjas we see, and then you finally get back to the cultures where these things originated, and you get the Tony Jaa's doing the Muay Thai, and you get Donnie Yen's doing Wing Chun, or like Chow Yun Fat, and not like Chuck Norris, some
Well, we
fucking
still
white.
get Jason Statham kicking people's butts.
That's true, but Jason Statham isn't like stealing any specific art, and the same is true with what's his name, Christian Bale. It's like they made up their own art for that, which is actually I think better than trying to steal one. So there's these elements of like, this is I think also why when you see the Daredevil fight scenes that are mixing Western boxing and martial arts, and they're not trying to steal Chinese martial arts or Japanese martial arts or Thai or Laotian or Vietnamese, and they're making their new own for this style, it actually works. So there's all these things about I don't know if you've seen the Daredevil hallway scene. Like it very much mimics the what is it? I think the elephant protector stairway scene with Tony Jaa. That's no cut. Like they've done it in a few movies. Like it didn't start with the elephant protector, but um like the no cut fight scenes where there's like 100 people in it, or like, it don't have to be 100, but when you're doing a fight scene where there's
Oh
like
man.
no cuts,
You want to know
it
how we
it
know that the ninja is dead culturally? Because we had this whole thing called COVID, and it was a pandemic, and people were encouraged to wear masks, and nobody took up the opportunity to dress up like a ninja. Like not one in person. And here's another reason I know that the ninja is culturally done in the West. Storm Shadow doesn't wear a mask anymore.
right,
Like
yeah.
straight up,
And
the ninja of GI Joe.
I don't think Snake Eyes did either.
Snake Eyes wears a weird helmet still, but like
But they when they did the Snake Eyes like specific movie, they took it off. I'm pretty sure. I didn't watch it,
I didn't
but
watch it
the
either because I decided that the GI Joe
the
stuff is like I just can't with that.
the main reason I didn't watch it is because there was no mask on the promo.
Yeah, like
You know what I mean? Like, why am I gonna watch Snake Eyes Ninja if there's no mask? That's not Snake Eyes to me. Which is where I'm like, good. I'm sure it's good for what it is, but it's like it's not the ninjas I grew up with.
yeah.
Snake Eyes Storm Shadow is like a black and a white ninja, all masked up. One of them never talks, and the other one talks too much.
Yeah.
It's like,
Well, that's the I think that's the worst part about the GI Joe movie is that Storm Shadow barely says a word like when they first utilize the character, and it's not until he has his own movie in the Snake Eyes movie that like he has an opportunity to speak, and they still don't make him talk too much.
yeah, Storm Shadow is supposed to be like overly verbose and antagonistic in a way where you're like, hopefully Snake Eyes whoops his ass, and then Storm Shadow ends up whooping his ass a lot of times because they got the same training when you see their origin story.
Yeah,
So that's why it's a good uh combination of protagonists and antagonists, because Snake Eyes don't always win.
because
So
Storm
like
Shadow can whip his ass while talking shit the entire time.
exactly, which is why he's cool, which is why a lot of kids end up buying the Storm Shadow figure over the Snake Eyes figure, even though the Snake Eyes figure is the good guy and in the black costume, which is arguably cooler depending on which day it is. So it's like,
I think the Snake
you
Eyes
know,
louver mask is way cool.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It looks cool as fuck. Have you
His
seen Metal Gear Rising?
no.
It looks like the
Are they copying
costume
some
from
Snake
Metal Gear
Eyes?
Rising. No, they. I think Snake Eyes copied that. If I'm not mistaken on the timeline, it may be the other way around, but I think Metal Gear Rising came out first. I could be wrong.
No, I don't want shopping Google. Give me images. Man, Snake Eyes is never gonna look this cool. Yeah, that full face mask. That's cool.
The Metal Gear Rising was in 2013, and Snake Eyes was in 2021. So they definitely. I assume somebody saw the Metal Gear Rising costume at some point and like was inspired by it. Um, it's not a direct copy, but it definitely compared to the Snake Eyes costume in the comic books, is definitely closer to the Metal Gear Rising shit than the comic book.
Yeah, why did he take his helmet off? Why did they reveal his face? I just looked at the Snake Eyes poster. There's his face. Why am I looking at his face? We're
Yeah,
never
that
supposed to know what he looks like.
yeah,
It's
that
this.
alone is why I never watched it.
It's the same power that of the Mandalorian. Nobody knows what he looks like. We're not supposed to know. Well, that just like makes it suck even more.
Well, there's an element of like media illiteracy, and then sometimes I wonder if it's intentional contrarianism. With okay, let's look at Boba Fett specifically. This character had like 3 seconds of screen time originally. Kind of no, not kind of fucked up a lot. Was not that um the agility and dexterity are questionable. Basically comedy relief. But then this group of, let's call it what it is, fucking nerds latches on to this character, and suddenly the Mandalorian lore is necessity to the franchise because so many people have latched onto this character to the point that then they created a TV show around Boba Fett that's all with him with the mask off, gaining the mask, and nobody liked it. So
Yeah.
like
Well, that's because they
that's
couldn't
why
imagine themselves in the under the mask.
because the whole thing to me feels like um misplaced angst that a franchise was lucky to grab up, and they didn't understand why, and they misunderstood why, and they thought they did something deliberately, because that's where I'm like you said, part of it is those people then couldn't see themselves in that anymore because the mask had come off. Same shit with, you would assume, with Peter Parker, but then those are the same motherfuckers that go see Tom Holland Spider-Man films like 3 fucking times in the theater and are like crying every single time because they're man children that have never grown up and are somehow still latched onto this character. But for whatever reason, Tom Holland and like uh Toby Maguire really represent them when the mask is off. So like,
I mean, grizzly old Boba Fett isn't. Nobody wants to be grizzly old Boba Fett. They want to be
right,
they
but
want to be
the
soft,
way,
supple pre Sarlacc Boba Fett.
but again, the way that group of Boba Fett lovers fawned over the character, you would think you could feed them anything and they're just going to eat it up. But that's not what happened. So that's to me why I think the franchise actually got lucky the whole time until they made the TV show. And then the people who were Boba Fett lovers are like, I want my old Boba Fett. Bring back old Boba Fett. And it's like, it's the same fucking guy. What are you like, guys? It's literally the old guy. But what do you mean bring back the old Boba Fett? And it's like they really just
Wait, they want
wanted,
the
like,
young old Boba Fett?
No, they want um a a voiceless masked person who they can project themselves onto with questionable morals so they don't also have to come down on any side is basically what it comes down to. Because when
Wow.
you look at the original Boba Fett, he wasn't a good guy.
Yeah,
He wasn't really a bad guy. He was just self-interested, and that's
he's the
okay.
model for self-interested fence sitting and violence.
Exactly.
Violent
Exactly.
self-interested fence sitting.
And once he stopped being that, that's when his fucking the fanboys shunned him. Once the Mandalorian got a cause and got a fucking backbone and got a spine and actually chose a cause and stuck with it, I don't like this. Yeah, it's the fucking Kevin Smith audience. It's like the the weirdest thing
The
I think that has
fanboys
happened.
audience.
Yeah, there's like these fanboys that like latch on to shit, completely misunderstand it, and create this false narrative of what the thing is meant to represent. And the only way they can do that is ignoring a large part of that thing's other history. So, like, one of the things that annoys me about Kevin Smith is like how he hangs on to the Batman no gun thing. And I'm like, dude, Batman, yes, Batman didn't use guns for a long time, but he did use guns for a long time. So, like, you can acknowledge both.
I mean, what
And
does
if you
Kevin Smith
grew up,
think about the Gundam he has to build to fight Darkseid?
I don't, I don't think Kevin Smith has read comics since he sold his comic collection to start his film career. I could be wrong, and maybe he read the comics that he wrote, but it doesn't feel like he kept reading comic books. Is what I was also getting at, and that's where there's like these elements you can see when people had that love and they lost it or gave it up or whatever and never got it back. And then there's people who never had it and then they gain it. And there's people who had it and never lose it. And I feel like Kevin Smith had it and lost it, never got it back, but then wanted to use that as a means to make more money. So that's where you get comic book guys or comic book men, whatever the show was called. And then like Kevin Smith making yoga hosers and these like comic book adaptation adjacent type things like Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back with Mark Hamill, who's heavy into like comic book adaptations. He's heavily present in them just all across all the universes. But like,
Oh, he's the voice of the
he,
cartoon Joker.
oh yeah, and not, but he's also the voice of like the game Joker, but
Yeah.
he's also in like fucking Invincible, and he's also in like a bunch of shit. Mark Hamill's in so much comic book shit where he was like the trickster in the original Flash TV show. Like Mark Hamill is so ever present in comic book adaptations. You're like, oh my God, this is really insane. This dude, he must fucking love this stuff because he's so ever present. And I don't get that same feeling from Kevin Smith, where I'm like, Mark Hamill, he don't need any money, but the fact that he's in Invincible, that motherfucker loves this shit. He
Yeah.
loves doing these voices for these comic book adaptations, clearly. So like that to me, there's like a stark contrast in a way where it also makes me like it's disheartening in that the Kevin Smith fanboys then pretend to be fanboys because they buy all the stuff, but they don't have to understand it or even represent it well to get that fanboy mantle in their own mind. So this like the Kevin Smith fanboys are like the ones that like buy their way into fanboydom and not really earn it in a way. And I feel like that a lot of that is his fault, like him specifically, and not his success isn't. Of course, people should be successful. It's what he did with it in that the Clerks cartoon or what is it, Clerks 2 and 3 and the sequels that the way he like sold out the integrity of his own independent works and in the process sold out the integrity of comic book adaptations, and then kind of shat on the original audience that was into his independent stuff and was into Kevin Smith stuff when he was into comic books. He like turned on that audience to become a corpo fucking rat effectively, but then try to represent that culture. That's where I'm like, I feel like he specifically okay, also Revenge of the Nerds too. There's this there are these cultural moments where nerddom and like fanboydom has been sold out to then become something that capitalists can acquire to overshadow the actual nerds and the actual fanboys so they can just buy their way into it and then buy their way over us. And in the process, it's like the authority that they gain by buying that is used to undermine the real ones, and in the process they don't care if they undermine their own authority because they can just go buy it somewhere else in another like cultural niche. And so like watching them move around, think about now, I've been talking about nerds, but think about skateboarding. Skateboarding used to be counterculture. It used to be what bad boys like. If you're a white kid that wants to like rebel against society, you fucking skateboard. Now it's like what suburban kids do if they are
Google's
bored.
AI, generative AI, says that skateboarding has evolved into a mainstream phenomenon deeply embedded in popular culture.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, it's not counterculture at all anymore. In the same way that punk music's not counterculture at all, same way that rap music's not counterculture, the same way playing video games not counterculture. So anything that's counterculture gets co-opted by capitalists, and then they undermine the people who are doing it by making a mockery of it because they can just move out of it. And that's why to me, like right now, the comic book stuff, I hate it. I really hate it because you see like the Marvels just came out and there's people who are like cheering for the failure of this movie. And I'm like, why? First off, the movie is not for everybody. So if the Marvel isn't for you, don't see it.
Yeah.
But to see people actively cheering for the failure of what is meant to be a fun comic book adaptation of um it's not like a story that's being adapted, but characters being adapted into a new property to further the love for these characters. To see people who call themselves fanboys cheering for that thing to fail, that's where I'm like, we're at such a weird place in fanboydom. And like I said, a large part of it is Kevin Smith's fault specifically, but I don't I don't know if comic book um I used to think Alan Moore was like way off base when he's like adults shouldn't be into comic books, but I don't think enough adults have the media literacy to actually engage with superhero stories. And I think Sir Alan Moore may be right about like if you're a 40-year-old and a comic book movie is like really making you mad, that person has some issues, like straight up. You know?
Oh, sorry. Even like hyper nationalist like trash doesn't like make me mad. I just turn it off and I stop watching it. Like that was there was
Exactly, exactly.
I can't even remember the name of that stupid movie that was pushing that QAnon child trafficking bullshit. But I turned it off because
Sound of Freedom.
it, yeah, well that movie didn't sound like freedom. It just sounded like an excuse to make a movie about people who were being punished. And that was it didn't even really rise to the level of a good story. It just made me feel like I was being told stuff. Show, don't tell. This is a movie, right? Well, we got plenty of crap, and it's easy to turn off. I tend to gravitate towards stories that I'm interested in. Like Loki, holy crap, that turned out to be the best damn story that MCU has delivered. Across two
Yeah, it was
seasons,
fucking amazing.
the last 6 episodes of Loki were fantastic. Like edge of my seat, I couldn't wait. And the moment when they're like, yeah, it could take hundreds of years to master physics, and then it says, or centuries, and then centuries later. Of course, it's Loki. He has as much time as he needs. He controls time. And I'm sorry for any spoilers, but they did such a good job of telling a story. I'm not even sure I could. I don't even remember what happened in phase 1 through 3 at this point because it's all just minutia. But the Loki story is so, even though it's all about multiverses and different timelines, it's so concise and it's paced so damn well. Like what what kind of magic is this? I know it's possible for Disney to tell a really good story because Lego just told a really good Avengers story and it only took 48 minutes. They did all the things. And I know that they've got it in them to tell a really big story because they just concluded Loki in however many episodes season 1 and 2 total out to be. I think the first season was like 10 hours. So they can tell really good stories. We're just being inundated with, giant micro meme roller coasters embedded in a grand roller coaster all the time. And Loki he barely had any powers in the first season and had like practically zero powers during all of season 2 until the very end.
Well, and it's like, so have you seen the Marvels yet?
No, I had not.
Okay, so I'm gonna try to navigate this conversation.
Yeah, I'm not even sure what it's about
Um,
entirely. I know that there's some big bad and she's like really bad, but that's about it.
I'm actually impressed that people aren't spoiling it. I don't know if enough people haven't seen it or not, but
I bet nobody's
it's
actually seen it.
well, yeah, I feel like that's it more than anything. But like, this is again why I'm like, having seen it and knowing what happens in it. Um, Half of the people who call themselves comic book fanboys are phony. Like if somebody is like calling themselves a comic book fanboy and hasn't watched the Marvels yet, they're fake is what it comes down to, mainly because the storyline is actually super important. It's like I I know for a fact it ties in with the end with Loki, even though not directly, it's definitely indirect. Not to say that because of how Loki ends, it's like that clearly ties in with everything. But what happens at the end of the Marvels is like it's such an oh shit moment. It's like literally worth seeing for the last post credit scene, which hasn't happened in a Marvel movie in a while. Like let's keep it real. There hasn't been a fucking post credit scene in a Marvel movie. I can't remember the last one to actually be an oh shit moment where something happens to move the story or move the universe along. Like I guess the T'Challa son was like kind of I don't know. Like the T'Challa son thing was kind of bullshit because they basically could have done that in the movie and used that entire movie as like a throwaway. um I won't call it a throwaway, a dedication to Chadwick Boseman, which unfortunately like didn't allow the plot to move forward at all. So the plot only moves forward in the last 5 minutes, really, and or the universe. Whereas that's not necessarily true for the Marvels movie in terms of it like moves the universe forward in slightly unimportant ways during the movie and then a majorly important way at the end of the movie that Loki. So I assume you've seen the season 2 finale now.
Yeah.
So to me, the Loki season 2 finale moves the universe forward at the cost of overriding the last 2 seasons of its own existence for the sake of moving that individual Loki's existence forward as a god of that timeline or those timelines that exist. Obviously, that's on a ticker until the Kang War and Secret War. But in that it feels like they figured out a way to like bring back stakes because I think the biggest problem the multiverse had was that once you introduce it, it like removes the notion of stakes because if anybody dies, we can just go to a different multiverse and that they're there. Now we have them. Like nobody actually dies anymore. And now we bring back real death, but it's clearly setting up the Deadpool Wolverine crossover, um, which is also where I'm like, the fact that people aren't talking about the ending of the Marvels is like,
Well, I mean, okay, so I've not seen the Marvel movie, but they're running out of time to introduce binary if they're going to start introducing uh, everything in time for Secret Wars.
I mean, but they do.
Okay, good. Well, in that case, then everything's on track.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying like they move it forward. So there's things that like even down to I don't did you watch Miss Marvel?
No, I completely slept on that. Like I didn't even
Well,
realize that it was a thing.
so if you didn't watch Miss Marvel, I don't know how like people weren't happy with that for various reasons. And they even fixed those things in this film to as much as they possibly could. So that's where I'm like, I won't say what they did or what they did in the original series in case you go back and watch it now. But there were things that happened in the Miss Marvel series and her powers that people were not happy with. That thing got corrected. So that's where I'm like, even the things that people who were actually into the series weren't happy with, them changing is to me signs that they're like trying to appease a specific audience, or with individual films they're going after specific audiences and they're not trying to do a catch-all because like there's a point in the film where I'm like, okay, I want to skip it. I'm just going to suffer through this just because in case I miss anything. I didn't really miss anything, but it wasn't for me. There's like a part where I'm like, okay, this is definitely is not for me. But I saw other people's reactions and they're like, I fucking love that part. This is one of my favorite parts in the movie. So it's like, I'm not gonna shit on that part because it wasn't for me, because I can acknowledge it wasn't for me. That's okay. But I think there is a certain part of the crowd that when those parts happen, they don't have any concept of that other crowd being necessary. It's like every Marvel MCU film doesn't have to cater to me specifically at every part to other groups if that is what it takes to like continue the MCU further. And the the crowd that is unable to like let other people have fun without then openly expressing their disdain or like not being able to just sit there and like roll your eyes at that part and like move on. That I feel is actually those are the people that are ruining comic book movies. It's not the Marvels that's bad. It's the reactions from 50-year-old men who shouldn't be watching the Marvels in the first place that's making these films insufferable. And that's where it's like it's the film isn't bad. It's fun. And like I said, there's things about it where I'm like, if you're a comic book like MCU adaptation nerd, you should be watching this because it's important.
Yeah, I mean,
But
I
if you're
watched
just like
Black Widow. I
this
mean,
nerd,
you got to suck it up occasionally, but but even still,
yeah, I watched Black Widow too. I sucked it up because that film sucked.
yeah,
It didn't move anything forward. The CGI was terrible. The best character, aka the Guardian, in that film was completely underutilized.
yeah,
Like it didn't take itself okay, and this is another problem. That film was about human trafficking. That never should have been PG-13.
nope.
A film about human trafficking, no,
A
no.
Disney
I
film
don't
about
care.
human trafficking.
I don't care if they don't go into the details, but you can't make that a fucking PG-13 film. And that's the biggest problem with Black Widow is they tried to like make it a film that kids could go see, and that's just not a Black Widow film. So like out the gate, it was setting itself up for failure. Whereas um, Captain Marvel doesn't need to be gritty. Captain Marvel doesn't need to be rated R. So that film succeeded, and people still act like that shit didn't make $1 billion. So like to me, the way that it like a movie could still make $1 billion and people are still gonna call it a failure because they'll do that just to make a narrative about women leads in film or whatever the narrative they're trying to construct. So like I don't think it actually matters how the Marvels performs so much as how people talk about it because now they're like, oh, the Marvels is on track to do worse than the Flash. So you're telling me Ezra Miller's Reign of Terror is less of a problem than a film having a black and Pakistani American and a white woman as their lead? Really? So more people are willing to like go support Ezra Miller when he was being accused of, potentially kidnapping, and then he had all these arrests on his record of him going into people's homes and premises and trespassing and like destroying property. That's less offensive than having female leads. Well, those people don't deserve anything. As far as I'm concerned, if that's how they're gonna respond to the Marvels movie, I'm cool with stopping to catering to them at all because Barbie came out and made $1 billion without those fucking people, and those people went to Oppenheimer. Oh, this is cinema. This is film. In the process, are glorifying some fucking white dude over ignoring all the Japanese people dying and justifying it because it's cinema and this wasn't about the Japanese people. And in the process, making it seem like we need to take those people seriously about a fucking comic book movie now. Because my thing is, you can't have strong opinions about Oppenheimer and the Marvels. You can't. No, nope, nope. I'm not gonna allow anybody to do that because that is a deeply unserious person. I haven't seen Oppenheimer because I don't care to, so I have zero opinions about it as a film. I've seen the Marvels. I'm not gonna hold opinions about those two. I'm never gonna see Oppenheimer because I'm not gonna watch some whitewashing of history, glorifying a fucking white man killing a bunch of Japanese people. Just not gonna do it. That's not me. So I can say this and not be a hypocrite because I know there's a bunch of people out there that went and saw Oppenheimer, had no critical opinion about the framing of the deaths of 300,000 Japanese people through the lens of this one white man. Those people, I sincerely doubt they have any strong opinions about that, but they're gonna be mad about the Marvels. I guarantee it.
I
It's the same fucking group. I guarantee it.
I read some of the comments surrounding Oppenheimer when it was released, and I didn't know there were so many nuclear physicists on the internet who seriously like who have time to take a break from like researching whatever it is, nuclear physics, and to take a break and correct people on the internet about a movie. It was really impressive. Like it's it completely blew my mind because normally I see bench mechanics and bench engineers talking about why something doesn't do something, but there are a lot of people out there who understand how atomic weapons work, like way more than I ever realized if I were to gauge take this impression from the internet.
One of the people I follow on Twitter is an actual nuclear engineer, and he was like, um, he just turned down a job developing a firing pin for a nuclear warhead. So it's like,
Good for him.
yeah, those people are out there. Those people actually exist. The ones that do those jobs and know those fucking things. And it's not some random person on fucking Facebook talking about Oppenheimer. Is not the same people.
Yeah, seriously, man. Like there are a lot of experts in the field of like nuclear arms and just nuclear physics. There are so many nuclear physicists out there that, and they're also like, they're also film buffs too. So it works out because apparently the film is great, but they have some concerns about Oppenheimer. I don't know any of this stuff. Like, I'm not a nuclear physicist. I don't even want to know what nuclear bombs actually do because to me that's like one step beyond necessity. Do we really need to blow things up with that kind of power? We can't even harness that kind of energy yet to generate electricity completely. But we can sure blow shit up. That's a lot easier than harnessing the energy.
Well, and I think part of it is the advancements in nuclear energy have been stifled because of propaganda, like propaganda from the oil industry. So it's like when you get propaganda machines that are a national corporate engines, that's when we start to see this like cyberpunk future emerging in a way where there's all I think even since the 1980s there's been this like corpo fascism that has reared its head through super PACs and like donating to political campaigns, but the ultimate end is making those political donations unnecessary because the laws have been effectively changed to the point that entrench those corporations in power enough now to the point that they have personhood. So like the fact that corporations have personhood and then can have interests as corporations that are vested that they don't have to act against, that's a dangerous precedent and a dangerous place to be in, especially when those corporations start to take out government contracts and don't have to disclose what they're doing with those government contracts. Because then you start to get government paying to undermine itself in a way that's black, doesn't have any sort of uh, oversight in a way that has responsibility, and then it falls all the way through the cracks in a way that doesn't have any association with itself. So then it becomes this like force of manipulation that's coming from the government that has no paper trail associated with it. And that's where when corporations are the ones funding those trails and with their interests in mind, the individuals in government don't give a fuck of the outcomes. And that's why it's so dangerous in the long term, because you have all these individuals who are willing to sell out like the American people to the corporations with no long-term sight into what they're actually creating. Because I I know there's no way like Mitch McConnell has read any fucking cyberpunk fiction or seen any cyberpunk anything. There's no way he's watched Blade Runner or like um Aliens versus Predator or some shit where there's like acknowledgement that corporations have taken over the functions of government, whereas government function is meant to facilitate corporate operations, not facilitate corporate authoritarianism. Whereas now, the corpo fascism that we're experiencing is like resulting in loss of rights, not just laws being created in favor of corporations. We're actually like losing rights now. So I think a lot of it has to do with Americans not being exposed to fiction and fiction that extrapolates into the future specifically. Um,
Man, Mitch McConnell is cyberpunk. On October 22nd of this year, he finally finished rebooting, and he made an announcement that he's completely recovered after his freezing incidents.
Mitch McConnell update 2.0 was pushed.
Yeah, the 1022
stopped freezing.
version 1022.23 finally finished loading, and he is completely recovered. Oh, all hail our robot overlords. May they be peaceful and shit. No, man, I don't think anyone in Congress has read any cyberpunk literature. I just don't. I just, or if they did, they completely misunderstood it.
Which I think, to be fair, it seems like most of the people who consume cyberpunk stuff misunderstand it. So like I won't put that on government specifically, but that's like a very Western thing to like, I think it's hard for white people to consume cyberpunk because the you, okay,
All the bad guys in cyberpunk are white dudes or white
no,
women.
it's not. That's not even it. So
I mean, at the
what I
top.
realized in discussing Cyberpunk 2077 last time is that what they do is you can experience the game any way you like, but what that then allows is people who ignore poverty in real world can ignore poverty in the cyberpunk world. So like you can have the same person who like walks by a homeless person who's asking them for money and completely ignores them, they can do that shit in the fucking game just the same or worse. They can like harm that person with no repercussion, harm that NPC with no repercussion, and take out some fantasy that they have about homeless people. So it gives white people who want to ignore poverty just another mechanism to experience high class existence and just completely put on horse blinders and ignore that poverty that still exists there. So that's where I'm like, oh, you can play fucking Cyberpunk 2077 and like if you let's say you choose a corpo playthrough and you don't choose the street kid or you don't choose the outsider, that you may never see a certain side of the town and a certain part of the town because your life only carries you to certain aspects of the city and you only ever see certain parts of the city unless you venture outside of that on your own. And that's where like people who don't follow the beaten path, that's how we end up with the story of the Buddha when they're born as the prince. But when the person like is born as a prince and they never go off the beaten path and never see the poor side of everything, then you get fucking George W. Bush, who means well, but because he doesn't understand anything outside of a silver spoon, he can't even there's no decision that he can make that's informed because he's lived too long without seeing real poverty or without seeing the direct results of his father's legislation or something like that. So that's where to me um the cyberpunk framework as like I feel like the same shit kind of happened with steampunk because it didn't seem like when something becomes an aesthetic, it's almost like the entire ideology behind it is lost then anyway. But once steampunk became all about aesthetics and the element of like retro technology,
Retrofuturism, I believe is what it was
right?
called.
Once retrofuturism was lost and it was all about the aesthetics, then we started like those stories started dying. Like Gotham by Gaslight, I feel like might be one of the last steampunk things I've seen in a long time. And it was like I thought it was weird that they even did it because it seemed like steampunk was like almost completely dead. Um, but that's where, cyberpunk as an aesthetic came and went, like synthwave came and went
I think
because
steampunk
it's
died because there were
anti-capitalist.
too many gatekeepers who wanted to be the arbiter of all that is steampunk.
That's true. I mean, I think that's
And
definitely true.
that's and then it became a whose costume is best as opposed to like who's coming up with the coolest idea and actually building it themselves.
But ultimately, these things are rooted in anti-capitalist ideologies.
Yeah,
So it's like them being trends has a shelf life. It's the same shit with zombies. It's like,
sure.
George Romero's zombies completely being rooted in anti-capitalism, and then a generation of people completely missing that. And then the zombie phase, like that zombie phase was on borrowed time, where you're like, you got zombie everything. There were zombie bullets, there were zombie knives, there were zombie bug out bags, fucking TV shows about preparing for the zombie apocalypse, The Walking Dead. There
Well,
was so much zombie shit during the zombie phase where I'm like, I didn't, I was never like a zombie fan, but the zombie phase made me actively dislike zombies and hate the people who were into zombies because it became such the opposite thing of what it was intended. Where I'm like, did you not watch the movies? Did you not watch Dawn of the Dead? Dawn of the Dead literally takes place in a fucking mall
yeah.
and is mocking mindless capitalism. Did you not get it? And no, they didn't. So it's like that type of shit where the reactions of the people who like become mindless consumers of these things and then wear it on their sleeve but don't seem to understand it. That really like I just can't take them seriously when they try to like mobilize, and now they're mobilizing against the Marvels, and that's the, I didn't come up with this rant out of nowhere. It's like seeing all of the anti-Marvel sentiment has like made me feel some type of way, because it's like if I was that's where you see these things happening in the zeitgeist, and you can only really like have an opinion about it, and that's where like seeing it happen, my opinion makes me feel like these people don't deserve anything. But unfortunately, they've been the point of catering for like the last 20 years. And I feel like we're starting to move away from it finally, in that the Marvels definitely isn't catering to them. And that's why they're so mad. But the Marvels also got released at the end of a strike. And they're trying to make it seem like the failure of this film is about everything but the timing of its release, rather than like there's a lot of things that this film was working against to succeed. And I don't know if it ever really had a chance to succeed, in light of like, if the stars of your film can't fucking market the film because they're legally not allowed to, without potential risk of losing their place in the union, that film is doomed to failure. So like I don't know if somebody calls themselves a nerd or like a comic book person or whatever, to act like the Marvels is losing at the box office for anything other than the actor strike and effectively incels dissing the film, is like actually super disingenuous, because if you watch it, it's fun. So that's why I'm like actively trying not to ruin it for anybody. Because I all that said, I hope people end up going and seeing the film, or seeing it on home release or whatever. But I just don't understand the active other side, where there's like mad, angry people who are mad that the film even exists, to the point where they're rooting for it to fail. That shit is wild.
Man, I wonder if they exist in some kind of industry that people are always trying to like are rooting for that job to go away through like automation or robotics of some kind. I bet the person that complains about that. No, wait, the people that are complaining. I bet the person that complains about that is the person that owns the comic book store, because they're the one who has time to read the comics and have a lot of really serious opinions about comics.
I mean, I don't know about that though, because like, have you ever gone to the local comic book store?
Yeah, they're actually really cool.
Yeah, Baldy doesn't have like angry opinions about any kind. And in fact, I feel like Baldy doesn't like talking about comic books, to the point where it's not that he hates comic books, it's that he probably has to deal with a lot of super opinionated people who have very strong opinions one way or another.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm like, I think I've talked with Baldy
Man,
about
who is it then?
running more than comic books. And I don't really run. He runs. I've talked with him more about working out definitely than comic books, but I think we talked about actual like marathon running more than comic books when I'm in there buying comic
That's
books.
funny.
Because it just doesn't seem like he just I've never seen him reading a comic book in the comic book store. Like I've been friends with someone he's dated. When we're hanging out outside of the comic book store, he doesn't talk about comic books. Like it's not like, and then the other people that have worked there, I don't talk to them a bunch, but they're not actively trying to start conversation. You know, the Simpsons comic book nerd is not really what I've actually experienced in those types of stores. Because then there was
now
like,
that you bring that up, I've never met the Simpsons comic book guy in real life. Like I've encountered people like that in
you
other
know,
areas of interest, but not at a
I
comic book
don't
shop.
I don't think that guy exists for one reason, and this is one specific reason. That guy that feels that strongly about comic books is not going to be able to let them go.
Yeah.
So he's not going to be able to sell them for a price that's going to be able to allow him to make enough of a profit to sustain or subsist. So it's like uh that that person is going to always price himself out of subsistence because he's going to want the top dollar, whereas Matt is fine with like taking a deal to, even if he breaks even on it, as long as he breaks even and doesn't lose money, he's going to move that shit to make space for something else
I wonder
because he
how many of
doesn't
the other
actually.
Simpsons stereotypes don't actually exist in real life anymore, or if they ever existed.
I mean, considering Apu was a white guy originally,
I would have
I want to say
loved
probably
to have
not
an
a lot of them.
I would have loved to have a bus driver like Otto. Like straight up. Oh no, we're running
Like
late.
bleeding gums.
Yeah, Bleeding Gums Murphy. Well, I bet that was actually pretty close to real.
I mean, except for the fact that like he's, unknown and needs some white girl to expose his legacy, and some little white 5-year-old girl to come save his legacy and shit like that, where it's like,
I didn't.
if you don't think about it too
Yeah,
hard,
I
it
saw
sounds
that interaction more as like Lisa, who is still
exactly
young and doesn't even have a full picture of the world,
exactly that's
goes
what
and
they're trying to
discovers.
do.
No, she discovered it for herself, and so to her, like everyone has to know about this thing because that's her thing. She wants everyone to know about all the things that she just learned about because she's an 8-year-old girl that's really excited about whatever she's into. But he was also at the end of his career and an old man and dying, and so I don't know. I didn't see it
See,
as like save his career. I saw it as more of like look at this treasure that's still here kind of thing.
right, but you're not black, and you aren't aware of what it feels like to have your music stolen and represented through a white person in a way that black people have, that is very like, there's a lot of shit that white people have stolen from Chinese people and represented, like music in some ways, but not the same way. It's not the same way as like the way they stolen rock and roll and fucking rap music and gospel music and other music from black people, and then repackaged it for a palatable white version. And that's where it's like they've done it with Chinese food for sure. So like this is where I know you wouldn't have had the capacity to read it that way because it wasn't happening to you then. Whereas like I'm sure they did some other super racist shit towards Chinese people that when you saw it, it probably you probably read it in a different way than I did.
Mm.
Because that's where there's other shit like I'm sure non-Indian people never thought about Apu, and I'm sure Indian people had strong feelings about Apu a long time before non-Indian people did, one way or the other, whether they liked him as a model or whatever, even though he wasn't an Indian person, or whether they did despise him. I'm sure Indian people felt some type of way about Apu before you or I did. Even though obviously Indians are Asian people, like all Asian people don't identify with each other necessarily. So like um it's like you may not identify with Apu as an Asian person. You may, I don't know, but I know Indian people are probably going to identify with that character and then come to some sort of like feeling one way or the other, whether they like it or dislike it, because that's meant to appeal to their ethnicity. And that's where like
Man, I
when they
knew this
had
guy named Neil years ago who's like from like the region area, like near Chicago, and his last name is very ethnic. I don't think I ever actually learned how to pronounce it correctly, but he told me that he had to use an Apu voice, like accent, to speak to one of his uncles so that they would understand each other, and that's how he like was able to understand one of his uncles. He had like he sounded like you or I. Did not sound like he had any accent. Just sounded like a dude from
sounds like
Chicago.
a self-hating Punjab is what it sounds like.
It was messed up. Like it was one of the weirdest experiences because when he told me, I was like, he's like, yeah, man, I have to talk to my uncle like fucking Apu.
I doubt it. I
Yeah,
doubt it. I feel like that's some shit he did to um
be funny in the
get
moment.
him, or not even just be funny, to suck up to white people.
Yeah, I don't
and
know. That
and
was a
that's
long time ago. I thought it was a really odd statement. It was really amusing just to think about, but I
and
don't
that's what I'm
speak to my
saying.
uncles
I
with like a bad Chinese accent to
This is
communicate.
here's the thing. If he's speaking to him in English but in a Punjab accent, then that motherfucker's bullshitting. Because I've been to India, deep Punjab, like talking to them. They understand me. They don't have any problem. I don't have to like fake a fucking Apu accent for them to understand my English. When they're talking Punjab to each other, that shit sounds like a more extreme version of the Apu version of like that voice. So I think to him, that dude, he can like make that joke knowing damn well that he don't talk to his uncle like that and try to like endear himself to like white people. Or if he does, his family talks about him when he's not there. Is one or the other. Is one or the other. Because like I know as a black person, the thing is code switching isn't just specific to black people. And that motherfucker was saying he was code switching in a way where I don't believe it, because here's the thing. I have actual, you've met a few of them. I have actual like thug ass cousins who, it's not like a costume, it's not them code switching. Like that's how they talk. And if I code switched and talked to them like that, it would be offensive to them in a way where they wouldn't like say shit to my face about it unless I was like a real asshole. But I know they'd be like, man, I don't know why Chris feels that like he got to talk to us like that. And they would get pissed and make it seem like I was like putting myself above them, because they knew damn well when I wasn't around them, I wouldn't talk like that. So this is why, if that dude was saying he was code switching to his uncle but still talking in English,
Man, that was like
either he was
20 years
lying
ago.
or his family don't like him. One of the two.
Was code switching even part of the lexicon 20 years ago?
Not really. Nah.
Poof.
It existed,
Well, of
but
course,
we didn't
but
have a name for it.
yeah.
That's the thing. Like, code switching obviously has existed for a very long time, but it wasn't until there was enough exposure to it for people to finally come up with a term for it. And that's where, like, I know to me, I can code switch, and the only times I even code switch is to fuck with people who can't tell the difference. And that's where, like, there's been situations where it's like, if I'm talking to like a thug person and I code switch, they'll take me less seriously than if I just talk to them
Like a
with
normal
my
person.
normal lexicon. Because the thing about it is, if I switch to code switching, it's a costume because I don't actually talk like that. So then suddenly they know I'm not real. And that's where, if like if I'm trying to get something across to a thug person, I don't code switch, because that immediately sends a red flag to them if they have any semblance of human like uh nature or how like behavior actually goes, because that's where it's like there's going to be certain things. If I start talking a certain way, you're immediately going to look and see, how's this dude dressed, like why is he wearing these shoes and this hat and these clothes, and it's suddenly sounding like fucking East Coast, West Coast, Blood versus Crips. Like, and in that, there's black people who code switch unnecessarily put themselves in a position where they make themselves look bad to the black people who don't code switch and talk like that in the first place. And that's why there's this like understanding of when code switching is necessary and when it's unnecessary. And it's like, if you don't feel comfortable to be yourself around your people and you feel like code switching is necessary, that's on that person. That's that person being uncomfortable because they don't think that they'll be accepted. So that's where, to me, there's many layers as to why code switching around your own people is often a bad thing, especially if you don't really talk that way. So that's where I'm like, if this dude talks like he's from the region and then starts talking Punjab around Indian people, one day he's going to be around some fucking Indian person from New Jersey and switch up to Punjab and then get called a racist. And those two might fight. And that's the shit where it's like, you can't do that shit and not have situations like that play out where it's like, yeah, I have dreadlocks, but I'm not going to go around code switching, pretending to be Jamaican around other people with dreadlocks, because them motherfuckers might be from Detroit. And then suddenly, why are you talking to me like that, bro? Are you assuming I'm Jamaican just because I'm got dreadlocks? What the fuck is wrong with you?
Yeah,
And now
dreadlocks
suddenly,
aren't like uniquely exclusive to
no,
Caribbean culture
no,
either.
not at all. But there was a period, even Dave Chappelle is guilty of this, where anybody who had dreadlocks, suddenly everybody's code switching around them. Bumbleclad Rastaman, Guaguan. And then it's like, it's okay for a while. But then once like Chet Hanks starts doing that shit, then we got to start checking people on the fucking patois. And it's like, not to say that
Chet Hanks.
it's plenty of white people who use patois because they were born and raised in the places that those things where those things are used. So that's not even what I'm saying. Cause like, I know you and I both have a friend, like he's white as fuck, but he's not code switching when he talks like that. So it's like when he talks that way to black people, they know he's not code switching, so they accept it. And that's why the funny thing is, people know when you're not being yourself, whatever you think, when you, not you, but whenever a person
Yeah, I'm too much of an
talks.
oddball to pretend to be anything else.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard you code switch in my life, one way or another. So that's where you've never needed to or felt the need to, but I'm sure you've seen other people do it in a way where it's like, what the fuck was that? Because that's being around enough people, you see code switching happen. And sometimes you see it and you're like, wait, what the fuck was that? Like, why did that person just code switch like that? What is going on in their mind? And it makes you think about that whole person's persona in a way that's why, again, like code switching is a risk. Often, I think that has more bad outcomes than positive, because it's like if you're trying to get a job and you code switch, that's one thing. But if you're like out in the streets or out at a, somewhere that's informal and people start trying to code switch, that's when like shit can go left real quick. And I think that um people don't assume that code switching is going to have as negative an outcome as it does. But I think when you code switch, you're inherently calling somebody stupid. because it's like, oh, you're not gonna see through this thing I'm about to do, even though I'm about to pretend I'm gonna act, even though there's no camera, there's no stage. I'm about to put on a show that only you are privy to, and I'm doing it because I think you're stupid enough to buy this show. That's what code switching comes off like to some people, and that shit can be us. Like the people who get insulted by it, it's like a major insult because it's specifically an intelligent insult when you do it or when a person does it. But when somebody catches it, it's even worse because there was this level of audacity for the person to try it in the first place that then is like, oh, not only do I think you're stupid, I don't think that you could do anything about it if I just like pretended to be an entirely different person and then I made you believe that I was this entirely different person from an entirely different place and then walked away as if I didn't just trick you. There's a
That's some like
real vileness
that's some
to it.
narcissism right there.
It is. It is.
Like, what kind of sociopath is like, oh, I'm going to assume a completely different like identity for this one person?
Bro, that's why I think when people code switch, there's a delusional level of narcissism that drives it in a way that I don't know if it's that whether they have the capacity or don't care to think about, which is again, that's why I don't code switch with my thug cousins, because it's like they can understand me. They don't need me to speak like I'm fucking from 8 Mile for them to understand me. I'll just talk like I normally talk, and
Yeah.
they'll understand every fucking word I say.
And if they don't, they'll
And
say,
then
hey, explain that to me. Because
exactly, because then
they're
I'll
adults.
have people who aren't thugs say they'll be the ones that speak up and be like, okay, bro, I don't understand that word you just said. Like my brother-in-law is I for all of the things he does, like I will always give him credit. If I say a word that he doesn't understand, he's like, bro, you got to explain to me that word, which is like, that is a fear of looking stupid is something that I think a lot of people never get over. But as adults, like English is weird because it makes you think you know it all, even if like even people who've studied etymology don't know every fucking word in English, and sometimes they
Oh,
have to learn a
yeah.
new word. But English makes you feel like once you're an adult, you don't have to learn any new words. And some people are afraid to let on that they don't know a word, and that's where I'm like, it's okay not to know every fucking word in the English language, especially low
And
frequency words that don't get used a lot.
there are 170,000 words currently being used in English globally. And there are
That feels low.
47,000 obsolete words that are no
Oh,
longer in
okay.
use. So that's
I mean, but that still feels low. Like, okay, let me frame it like this. I think maybe our perception of words is
this does
disproportionate
not
because of
include
numbers.
conjugations.
Yeah, I imagine it also doesn't include numbers as individuals.
Yeah, no.
And that's where it's like I feel like numbers then
Numbers would account
make it
for it.
right. The numbers make our perception of the amount of words disproportionately large when the actual number of words that's used it seems to be. I feel like that's not very high. Like 147,000. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
That's not that many
There
words.
are
Like
an average of 80 native English speakers globally use somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 words. No, sorry. 80% of daily communication is composed of somewhere between 2 and 3,000
the
words.
same 2,000, 3,000 words. Yeah.
Yeah, and those
And
include
you know what? I'll take a gander. I would bet about 10% of those words are associated with weather. I mean, not to say that they have that statistic
um
there handily, but I would bet because then you look at other languages where like a lot of their discourse is about like I think it's like 90% or something of Japanese daily discourse is about weather
the most
in the average
commonly used
conversation.
words: the, be, to, you, I.
Uh,
I and you are letters.
Narcissism is a hell of a drug.
Oh man. So let's just say 3,000. Let's see, what's 3,000 out of 140,000? So the average per English speaker
Like
uses
1.5%.
2% of the active English language.
Yeah. I mean, that that sounds about right. And I only say that because a lot of people don't think a lot. They just go through life and don't think. So I'm not
2%.
imagining too many people find those 145 other thousand
And
words.
it's definitely 2%. It's like 0.020408. It's definitely 2%. It's not a almost 3 or an almost 2. It's squarely in the 2% at 3,000 words, which apparently is a lot. This does not bode well for complex languages. Oh man.
So Shakespeare used over 20,000 words in his plays and poems, if that puts it into perspective. I would have thought it was way more than that. It's great.
Well, he was exceptionally verbose for the time. That's still a lot of words. 20,000 words. That's like some expert level language utilization.
Well, he supposedly invented around 1,700 words. So that's one of the reasons that we reference him in English so much.
Man, where would we be without Shakespeare?
Exceptional rating.